Hello and welcome to the first video in our Rollerball series. What we'll be creating here is a game that uses a lot of the basic sort of features of Unity and allows us to begin to understand of how it all works here. So first of all, let's do a little overview. Looking on the far left side, we can see the hierarchy. The hierarchy is basically every object that is in our scene. And you can think of our scene as kind of like a level. It's the current thing that we're sort of working on there. So at the moment, pretty basic. We have a main camera and a light. If I zoom out, we can see that light and the camera there. Now this one, obviously the main window, kind of does two things. One is it's the scene, so it allows you to work and kind of edit and change things as you're building your game. The other one, so it pops up there with the game with that little controller, is the game window. At the moment, it's quite static because that's what the camera is showing as the world. And if we did hit the play button, which I won't bother here because there's nothing going to happen, but that would be the view that we would see when we're playing the game. And obviously, if the player was moving or the camera was moving, things would be a little bit more interesting here. On the far right side is what we call the inspector. And so the inspector allows us to see the components that make up those game objects. So at the moment I've clicked on the directional light and you can see that it has a position in 3D space. So it has an X, Y, and Z coordinate. It has rotation and it has scale. So every component that's going to be in your scene, because it exists in sort of 3D space, is going to have its transform component. Now the components below are going to be perhaps different, right? So this one is, because it's a light, it has a light component. And you can see all these various options. We won't worry about those now. You're free to play around with them later on. But those components describe, or these properties inside this component describe how this light operates. So its color, how bright it is, etc. Now later on, we'll be able to add different components. We'll also be able to script our own components that will add functionality to our objects. Coming along the bottom here, so we've sort of done it in clockwise manner, this is really sort of more the organizational side of things. On the left side here, we sort of have our project window, which shows us sort of the folder structure and all the items that we might have. And then on this side, in this sort of this asset scenes, that's going into your folder structure. And then that allows us to sort of see things and perhaps drag them into our scene. And you'll sort of see how we do that later on. The important thing, of course, is to keep things organized. Now, what we want to do is actually start building our game here. So the first thing that we'll do is bring in some 3D objects. The 3D objects that we're going to bring in are very simple. If you're going to bring in, create a real game, and I'm putting that into air quotes, you probably would not use the basic objects that come along with Unity, but you would sort of import them from different programs. However, let's click on Game Object. Anything in our scene is a game object. There are lots of options here. We won't worry about that too much yet. Just go to 3D Objects, and then you can see we have an array of 3D objects we can bring in. The easiest thing to do, and what we're going to do here, is bring in a plane. Now a plane puts it into our scene. It will come in as a certain size, 111, so the scale is 111. And then depending if you clicked or whatever, your position might not be 000. But what we want to do is set that position to 000. Now the easiest way to do that is just come in and type that. Now, if you wanted to, you could, click on the arrow key here, sort of, and then move it in 3D space. So left, right, up, down. And then if you grab the middle, you've got sort of, you can move it over. That's good when you're not too worried about exact positioning. But if you want it a exact position, which we do here, we want to make sure that that's 0, 0, 0. Now, we're not going to rotate this. It doesn't need rotation. However, the scale, we're going to scale this up by a factor of 2. Now notice I changed the X and the Z, and that's because if you look at here the little 3D widget, X and Z comprise that 3D, sort of the 2D part of the plane, right? So in our 3D world, X and Z sort of makes our flat ground, and then the Y is our horizontal. So obviously we don't need to scale it horizontally here, okay? Or sorry, vertically, I mean to say. So yeah, so X and Z are horizontal, Y is our vertical. Now, that brings in our plane. Plane is probably not a good word because it might sound like it's an airplane or something like that. So let's call that ground because that's going to be our surface that we're going to work with for our game. Let's bring in one more object, and then that object is going to be another 3D object. It's going to be our sphere. And really this is going to be our player. Now it's come in, it's sort of setting 1, 1, 1. If I sort of come in, and you can move around, let me just make sure that our ground didn't move accidentally. No, our ground's good. Okay, so this ball here, again, it came in 1, 1, 1. It's raised up a little bit. So I'm going to set it back to 0, 0, 0. I'm going to call it player as well, because that will be our player. Now, when I sort of navigate around this here, so I'm holding my middle mouse button down and then just sort of dragging, and I can move it left, right, up, down. I can sort of move it around. If I hold down the right mouse button, then I can kind of rotate around objects, okay? So that makes sort of rotation. And then, of course, like you'd expect, the scroll wheel, moving it, allows us to zoom in and zoom out. Now, if I sort of look at this a little bit carefully, I can see that half my ball is sort of above ground and half is below. So I want to raise it up. Basically, the diameter of the sphere is 1. So I'm going to raise it up half a unit, and that will let me have it sitting on the surface. Okay, good. So yeah, so we've got our basics in here. We've got our ground that we're going to be able to move around on, and then we've got our player that we'll be able to control. Now we do want to do one more thing here in this video, and that's just add a bit of color to them. So at the moment they're pretty, they've got the default sort of color on them that's gray. We want to give them a little bit more visual interest here. So I'm going to come over to my project panel, and in the assets you can see that we have a folder called scenes. I'm going to make a new folder to keep everything organized. Like we've talked about, organization is always important. So I'm going to right click inside this area and I'm going to create a folder. And that folder I will call materials. So we're going to put our materials in here. Now at the moment it's empty, so I'm going to double click and I'm going to be inside the materials folder and I'm going to add a material. So I'm going to right click, create, and thankfully they've put that right close here, but there is a material. So if I click on that material, then it's there. Now I can give it a name. I'm going to make one red. Okay, I'm going to make the player red. You can change the color up. Very simple material, nothing fancy here. On the albedo, just click in here and you can set the color. So I'm going to set it to red. If you want to change it, feel free. I'm just going to make that red color there. So that's what it looks like, a little bit of a preview. That's fine. Don't worry too much about materials. We'll talk more about them later, or you can explore them more later. And then what we want to do is add this to the player. So all we have to do is just drag it in. You can see the ground becomes red, and then this becomes red. So I'm just going to drag it on. Okay, and now our our player is red. I'm going to make our ground, create material. Okay, and I'm going to make this one green. You can change the color. I'm just going to go to the albedo, change, this here, find a green. I'm not going to worry too much. Any type of green is okay, maybe a little bit darker. Close that up, and again, just drag it on, and there's your scene. So it does look a little bit better, right? We've got now maybe Christmassy colors, but we've got a red player and a green ground. And again, feel free to modify those colors. All right, so let's just save this up. Now, before I do that, I always like to make sure I don't call scene the scene, right? So at the moment, if I go back to assets and in my scenes, we've got this called sample scene. What I found in the past is that sometimes if you bring in, and we will see later on, different well, not so much components, but different things from the Google Play, or sorry, not the Google Play Store, the Unity Store, they often have that same name and it can overwrite it. So what we just want to make sure is that we change this name. So I think the easiest thing to do is just come in here, change the name, and I'm just going to call it level 1. And now you can see up here, it's called level 1. That's just something that's useful to do, okay? And you could have multiple scenes. We'll just start with this one scene, and you can add scenes later on. All right, since we haven't saved this yet, You can see that there's an asterisk there, there's an asterisk there. It's important to save. So I would just come under here and go File, Save, and just make sure that the asterisk is gone. All right, so we've got our ground, we've got our player. Now we're going to look at how we can make it move around the scene.